Mm-hmm. Okay. There's some senators in here. Just want to make sure I was. Yeah, it's like a GOV, there's like 5 Congress.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here today. Today is an exciting day and one that has been in the making for over 2 years. At the start of my chairmanship on the House Judiciary Committee in 2013, I, along with Ranking Member Conyers, created a bipartisan overcriminalization task force to look at the criminal justice system and the laws on the books to determine how best we can improve the system. And in June of this year, Mr. Conyers and I announced a bipartisan criminal justice reform initiative. We don't always agree on everything, but we do agree that criminal justice reform is not a liberal or a conservative issue, it's an American issue. As part of the committee's initiative, we've been pursuing responsible, common sense reform to ensure our criminal justice system reflects core American values. We want to make sure our federal laws and regulations effectively and appropriately punish wrongdoers, protect individual freedom, safeguard civil liberties, work as efficiently and fairly as possible, do not impede state efforts, and do not waste taxpayer dollars. We've been working for months to identify solutions on issues such as overcriminalization, sentencing reform, prison and reentry reform, improved criminal procedures and policing strategies, and civil asset forfeiture reform. And today we are unveiling our first piece of legislation, the Sentencing Reform Act. This bill is companion legislation to the sentencing provisions contained in the Senate bill introduced by Senators Grassley, Durbin, and others last week. Our bill makes common sense changes to the front end of the criminal justice system. It reduces certain mandatory minimums for drug offenses, including the 3-strike mandatory life sentence to 25 years. It broadens the existing safety valve for low-level drug offenders and provides judges with greater discretion in determining appropriate sentences. Most importantly, however, the bill contains important limitations to ensure that serious violent criminals serve the full time for their crimes in prison. It also contains sentencing enhancements for trafficking in fentanyl, a highly dangerous drug 80 to 100 times more potent than morphine, which is often cut with heroin and has led to a surge of overdose deaths across the country. The House Judiciary Committee plans to move the Sentencing Reform Act through the committee soon and will roll out additional criminal justice reform bills over the coming weeks. I want to thank all of the members who are here today for their work on this issue. I especially want to thank Ranking Member Conyers and Congresswoman Jackson Lee for the many years that they have worked on criminal justice reform and for their willingness to find common ground with me on this issue. Congressman Labrador has been a leader on this issue as well, and I appreciate his good work, as well as that of Ms. Chu and Mr. Bishop. We will take your questions upon the conclusion of all members' remarks, and with that, I'd like to invite Congressman Conyers to say a few words on the bill.
Thank you, and top of the morning. I wanted to express from the beginning my appreciation for the cooperation that I've had with Chairman Goodlatte. This is the second major bill that we've worked on together, and with my colleagues here, we're making a change. We're working on a bill, as he has said, similar to that by Senators Grassley, Patrick Leahy, Dick Durbin, Cory Booker, Mike Lee, and others. What our bill does is reduces the mandatory minimum sentences for prior drug felons, including reducing the 3 strikes drug penalty from life imprisonment to 25 years and reducing the 20-year mandatory minimum to 15 years. It broadens the existing safety valve to allow more offenders to be sentenced below the mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years for certain drug offenses. It creates an additional safety valve to allow relief for some offenders who would otherwise be subject to a 10-year mandatory minimum for certain drug offenses. It reforms the way prior firearm offenses are considered with respect to application of a mandatory minimum sentence for repeat firearm offenders. And it retroactively applies the reduced mandatory minimum sentences for crack cocaine under the Fair Sentencing Act. My colleagues that are with myself and the chairman are all committed to this. We have this rare coming together of a bipartisanship, which makes it a real difference. And I want to thank again Mr. Chairman Goodlatte, Ms. Chu and Mr. Labrador, and certainly Ms. Jackson Marie, and Congressman Bishop. I also want to thank my colleagues, Representatives Jim Sensenbrenner and Bobby Scott, for all the work that they've done additionally over the years in pursuing criminal justice reforms, including the work on the committee's over-criminalization task force in the last Congress. I'm confident that we can all work together to move this legislation through the Congress. It's a signal moment to me in our work on the House Judiciary Committee, and we want to get it to the President's desk as soon as possible for his signature. I'm now pleased to introduce our ranking member on the Crime Subcommittee, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
Thank you so very much. This is a very special day, and you will hear redundant themes because all of us are committed to this wonderful concept of criminal justice reform. I'd like to express my appreciation for the very special working relationship between the chairman, Mr. Goodlatte, and the ranking member, Mr. Conyers. That is a special, special relationship in the context of the Judiciary Committee that has, on many occasions, many controversial issues. They've worked together, and I've enjoyed the collaboration with both of them as a ranking member, and as well working with the many members on the committee, including the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, and certainly, as was previously mentioned, Mr. Scott, who served before. I want to thank Mr. Labrador for his long-standing service, Mr. Bishop for his experience in this area of criminal justice, and as well Congresswoman Chu, a member of the subcommittee, who has a special insight in these very many issues. Criminal justice reform has languished in the shadows of legislative activity for many, many years. We know that with the introduction of this legislation, we've now made a singular statement that joining with the Senate, we will have an opportunity to have the President sign a criminal justice reform initiative that will help millions of families here in the United States. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for the hard work and collaboration that we've shared in developing this Bipartisan Citizen Reform Act of 2015, and on the criminal justice reform legislation in other critical areas that we will be unveiling over the next few weeks, emphasizing that criminal justice reform is comprehensive and it touches all aspects of dealing with this question of how do we give due process, liberty, and freedom. We come together today armed not only with the knowledge that our criminal justice system is deeply flawed, but with a commitment to fix these flaws. The cost of this system is incredibly high, not just in dollars spent, but also in dollars lost. Every person taken out of a community and placed into a prison is a person who cannot contribute to a family and a community and a society. Our recollection is that we spend thousands of dollars for every person incarcerated in the federal, local, and state system. Worse, the system takes an incredible human toll, with the cycle of incarceration in a constant state of destruction. Having dealt with the children of incarcerated persons in my own school district, in special schools dealing with their needs, we find that often those individuals, those children, those innocent children, wind up in the prison system. Today, this legislation, we unify to reject a system that is often more effective at creating criminals and collateral damage than actual justice. We have come together for change. I'm sure that my chairman and the ranking member would agree that when we began this process a few months ago, we were not particularly optimistic about reaching an agreement on sentencing reform. In fact, the reason we dug into it first is because we knew how hard it would be. It's important to note that the House Judiciary Committee has been working on sentencing reform for a very long time, almost running into 2 years. Along the way, however, we were inspired by the ideas of many of our House colleagues during this and in past Congresses, and by our colleagues in the Senate who undertook a similar effort months before. In fact, our negotiations in the House largely mirrored those in the Senate. We wanted to increase mandatory minimums, expand the safety valve, and apply the Fair Sentencing Act retroactively. And that's what we did. This is not surprising. The injustices of our system are very well known, and the solutions are rather common sense and straightforward. Our legislation lowers the many mandatory minimum recidivist penalties, expands the safety valve, and adds a second safety valve to provide greater relief to the individuals most deserving. In doing this, we recognize that locking up people for decades and decades does not work. Our legislation also applies the Fair Sentencing Act retroactively, bill signed in 2010 by the President of the United States, and in doing so, it makes it very clear, something very important for people who are incarcerated and able to access these opportunities. They're frightened, they're confused, they don't have information. We make it very clear that those who only received a partial benefit of the Federal Sentencing Act under the sentencing guidelines changes can now come back and get full benefit. On its own, the reform will help over 6,000 inmates, about 85% of whom are Black, and bring us one step closer to rectifying the fundamental injustice of the crack cocaine powder disparity. Notably, this bill does not contain new mandatory minimums that are recently in the recently released Senate bill. Such meaningful reforms would not be possible without the leadership of those who stand beside us today, and in the Senate, colleagues on the right and left, and the many individuals and advocates who laid the foundation for us. Let me conclude by saying, in my service as ranking member on the House Judiciary Crime Committee, I've been truly humbled to take on this task, one of the most important tasks of my lifetime, but even more humbled to be joined and to be interacting with some of the great leaders of this Congress. This task, our task, is monumental, and it's certainly not easy, but with the introduction of this legislation today, we're stating not only that we're up for the challenge, but that we pledge to see it through. In the coming days, we continue to build on legislation, and we must not lose sight of the ultimate goal, that is a sentencing reform bill to the President's desk. I implore us not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I look forward for us moving forward on prison reform, juvenile justice reform, and many others. By working with Chairman Goodlatte, Mr. Conyers, and I feel that we're putting forth the effort that has the best possible chance of success. Because at the end of the day, for the thousands of individuals in prison now or who may face a prison sentence later, the opportunity to rehabilitate their lives, join their families, come into their communities, go to their houses of worship, and contribute to the greatness of this country is worth our work, and I am looking forward to the President signing such a bill. It's my pleasure now to introduce a gentleman that we've worked with and has a strong commitment to criminal justice reform, Congressman Laverdale.
Good morning. It's a great honor to be with all of you today. Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte and Ranking Member Conyers. Thank you, Ms. Jackson-Lee, and all of us who are here today. This is truly a great occasion. It's not something that happens every day. I'm going to have to stop doing this because people are going to start calling me a liberal one of these days. But I appreciate the efforts of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and find areas of agreement on the issue of criminal justice reform. I continue to be encouraged by the momentum building for reform, particularly sentencing reform. I have long advocated for initiatives that reduce sentences and expand previous reform efforts. I was actually a criminal defense attorney before I came to Congress, so I was a rare type of bird, which was a conservative Republican criminal defense attorney. And I have seen the effect that the improper sentences has on families. I have also seen the effects that crime has on families. And it's something that we as members of Congress need to take really a close look at what's happening in our society and how we can better improve the lives of many people. I believe that this bill is a valuable compromise that advances these priorities and improves a system that has frustrated individuals and families for many decades. With 5% of the world's population, the U.S. has 25% of the global prison population. While some opponents believe sentencing reform will lead to more crime, I think the opposite is true. We must be tough on those who deserve the harshest sentences, but we must be smart in dealing with those who deserve a second chance. Our bloated prison system does not benefit inmates, taxpayers, or society. Instead, these policies are incarcerating countless individuals and placing them in a system that teaches them how to be criminals, rather than allowing greater discretion for individual cases that promote some relief from past mistakes and proper punishment for their crimes. This bill takes a critical step toward advancing needed reforms, and I am proud to join my colleagues in this effort. Thank you very much, and it's my honor to introduce Congressman Bishop.
Thank you, Congressman Labrador, and thank you, Chairman Goodlatte and Ranking Member Conyers for your leadership in this matter. As a former prosecutor and also as a former indigent defense attorney in my younger years, one of the first things I wanted to do when I first got to Congress was to meet the members of the criminal justice community and the policymakers in this area, and just to learn about the issues impacting not only my Michigan's 8th district, but across this great country. And I want you to know that I'm very proud to co-sponsor what I believe is a fiscally and socially responsible legislation that not only protects our communities from violent criminal offenders, but also provides flexible sentencing for those who deserve it. I also want to comment on Congressman Chairman Goodlatte's comments about some of the other reforms. I'm very optimistic about the reforms made to address America's growing heroin epidemic, which is destroying families and young lives across our country. I believe Congress must do whatever is necessary to address these issues and to support law enforcement and do whatever we can to repair our local communities. I'm very proud to be a part of this. I'm grateful for the opportunity and look forward to working with my colleagues to get this done. And now it's my great honor to introduce Congresswoman Chu.
Well, there are those who think that we're stuck in partisan gridlock, but today is an example of bipartisan cooperation, and it's on such an important issue. That's why it's such a privilege to be here today with this bipartisan group of colleagues from the House Judiciary Committee to announce this historic effort to finally fix the glaring problems in our criminal justice system. And I really have to commend Chairman Goodlatte and Ranking Member Conyers for coming together in this effort. Decades ago, I was a drug abuse counselor dealing with people addicted to heroin and methamphetamines. And what I learned from that is that these people need rehabilitation and help, not to learn how to become better criminals in our jails. And so this bill couldn't come soon enough. Just a glimpse at our broken criminal justice system will tell you that. The U.S. has 5% of the world population, but 25% of its prisoners. And 93% of these federal inmates are nonviolent. A majority of them are in for drug crimes. Worse still, the federal prison population as a whole is disproportionately affected by people of color. For black males in their 30s, 1 in every 10 are in prison or jail on any given day. There are more than 1 million black children who have a father in prison. And every year we spend $80 billion to lock away more than 2.4 million people in jails and prisons. This money would be better spent on community law enforcement programs, training prosecutors, and creating strong recidivism programs to ensure people who get out of prison can become productive citizens. Clearly, we've lost our focus, and the answer cannot just be longer sentences. In fact, many judges complain of having their hands tied by mandatory minimums when they know from experience that a more just or compassionate approach is called for. Do we want to listen to the experts and those who are involved in sentencing, or do we want to remain the incarceration nation? Well, I'm glad that here today we are choosing the former. This bill cuts back mandatory minimums so they apply more fairly It expands the current safety valve and creates a second safety valve so that offenders that have minor criminal histories and are minor actors in large criminal networks aren't sentenced disproportionately for their crime. This is only one of the solutions being put forward by our committee, and I'm proud to be working on the other fixes from sentencing to release. But this is such an important and historic step forward, and I look forward to seeing it come to the floor.
Thank you, everyone, and now we'll be happy to take questions from members of the meeting.
Was there one thing that sort of brought this together? You said you've been working on it for a long time. Why now? What is it that spurred this actually getting done? And second question, Chairman Goodlatte, have you talked to leaders about this? Obviously, there's a little bit of confusion about who the leaders are going to be, but do you think this is something
Sometimes that's a good opportunity to
That's
move
right.
this up. But,
do you think this is something that can move?
I can tell you from the outgoing speaker to the other members of our current leadership, to many members of our conference on the Republican side, there's a tremendous amount of interest in criminal justice reform. With regard to the work here, we've decided to take this major issue of criminal justice reform, involve as many members, because different members have interests in different parts of legislation. So that's why you'll see many more bills coming after this one. But we felt that sentencing reform would be the best test in terms of showing real bipartisanship. So we concentrated on that first. There are tough issues involved. We want to make sure that sentences are fair and just, but we also want to make sure that, for example, we're not releasing violent criminals back onto our streets, and that we're addressing problems like the current surge in overdose deaths. I mean, it's very, very sad what is happening with heroin, and especially heroin cut with fentanyl, or even fentanyl sold separately. It is a very deadly drug, and this takes some measures to address that. So we're very pleased about the work that was done on both sides of the aisle and by all of these members to make sure that we have a good bipartisan agreement. That takes time.
Mr. Chairman, you said that there was sentencing enhancement for fentanyl. Is that a mandatory minimum? Do you have any new mandatory minimums?
No, it's not a new mandatory minimum.
Okay. Can I ask you too about the task force? You had the overcriminalization task force for about a year.
Yes.
And this doesn't appear to reflect what the testimony of the task force was. I mean, it sort of reflects the Senate bill. So if you were going to Xerox the Senate bill, what was the point of the task force?
Well, the task force has done a great deal of valuable work. It worked for the entire last Congress. It held 10 hearings and derived a great deal of information from a wide array of perspectives. We heard from 40 or 50 witnesses, and the overall result of that is many ideas that are incorporated into this legislation. We've had ongoing communications with members of the Senate on both sides of the aisle and have worked in concert with them. So it's not a Xerox of their bill. There are differences in this bill, but there are also many complementary things because we've worked with the Senate to accomplish that. And finally, we want to make sure that it's understood that there are going to be a number of other pieces of legislation to follow, which will be the reflection of a lot of work of a lot of members of the House, including members of that task force. And by the way, Mr. Conyers and I both served as ex officio members of the task force.
Can I just add?
Yes, please.
Before you leave that, the task force sparked and motivated us to look at this more closely. And it worked beyond just the task force membership itself. It was reaching out to all of our members of the committee, both these and ours, and it was the backdrop of us coming to this very excellent introduction of a bill.
I understand as a point to that. I started out my remarks by saying that criminal justice reform has been languishing in the shadows of legislative work. There have been many people who have been motivated and inspired, and many of us have personal stories. In my congressional district office, I'm often getting calls from families who are crying about persons being incarcerated, either they believe wrongly or they've been there long for offenses that they can't understand. And I cannot think of a more passionate way to respond to those who have been crying, mothers and fathers, for these individuals who are nonviolent offenders that we have not been able to respond to. The Criminal Justice Task Force, the Criminalization Task Force, was an effective framework, a pathway, a bridge for us to walk over to make sure that we have building blocks. 2 million plus incarcerated in state, local, and federal. The building blocks begins with sentencing reform, which will allow many of these people to restore their lives. And then you have to address prison reform, civil asset forfeiture. My passion, juvenile justice reform, that hopefully makes a very large statement for this nation. So I'm excited that we have opened the door and that we have a companion initiative in the Senate, but that we've gone further. That we have no new mandatory minimums at all, and that we have addressed something that is plaguing our communities. You hear both the advocacy groups as well as law enforcement talk about heroin killing people. And I want our children to live. So I think what we've done is we've opened the door, and the door will march on to the president's desk, and then we'll have following behind it opportunities to be able to help others who are in need of criminal justice reform.
Mr. Chairman, and anyone else who wants to respond, just this week, the Justice Department held a summit here in Washington on ways to reduce violent crime. There is an increase in homicides in some big U.S. cities. Does that complicate the politics or the substance of what you were trying to do here in the city?
I don't believe so, because we want to make sure, as a part of our series of criminal justice reform measures, that we address the needs of law enforcement. But we want to make sure that it's done in a way that is fair, makes common sense, saves taxpayer dollars. And so we believe that if you have smart sentencing and you have a prison reform initiative, which will come behind this one, and you have some of the other reforms we are discussing regarding policing strategies and so on, that you're going to have better law enforcement, and you're going to have a better ability to combat serious violent crime. And that's one of the reasons why in this measure we took special pains, and that's a difference with the Senate bill, to make sure that people who are already in prison serving sentences for violent crimes do not benefit from the early release that some will get who committed nonviolent crimes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
This week, the administration announced that they're soon going to release some 6,000 prisoners. Is that putting a cart before the legislative board?
Well, it does raise some concerns on the part of some of us, and I think it illustrates why the Congress needs to act in this area, because this was a change made by the Sentencing Commission, and it is going to result in several thousand people being released. We asked for, in my office, a list of those who are going to be released in the Western District of Virginia, which includes the 6th Congressional District that I represent. We got the list and started looking at who these people were. The very first person on the list was a murderer, a convicted murderer. So that again raised concerns that we would be in a situation where if we weren't careful, releasing people who were prone to commit more violent crimes. And so we've taken pains to make sure that that does not take place. But I think the main lesson to learn from that is that the Congress, which has the Article I responsibility to legislate in this area, as in many others, needs to step up and take these measures, because we, after all, instruct the Sentencing Commission, and I think they were getting out ahead of where they needed to be. So I think that was certainly an impetus for the work that is being done now on criminal justice reform.
Mr. Chairman, today there's Senate Democrats are introducing gun control legislation. Does your committee have any plan to hold hearings on this? I know the family of the reporter who is sadly slain in your district have asked you to look into it.
Well, we are very concerned about gun violence in the country, and we are looking at measures like making sure that employers who know referring specifically to the case you cited in my district, who know that someone may have anger issues, even violence issues, is reported down the line. So when a new employer asks, have you been, about an individual, that the previous employer is incentivized to tell that employer about those kinds of things. And we're considering other types of things that can be done. My opinion, however, is that when it, and I'm sure we're going to have differences of opinion here on this, but my opinion is that we need to have greater enforcement of the myriad of gun laws that we already have on the books. Prosecutions for gun crimes of all kinds, whether it's use of a firearm in commission of a felony, whether it is illegally buying or selling firearms, whether it's lying on the instant check form that you fill out when you go to purchase a handgun. Those prosecutions are down 30% over the last 6 years. And I think that is where the focus needs to be placed, coupled with mental health reforms to address that issue. But we're here today to talk about our bipartisan.
Yeah, we were trying to be bipartisan. Thank you.
Do you know what the cost savings for the legislation is potentially in that score?
We do not have a score yet, but we share your curiosity.
But I do want to add that right now, the cost of incarcerated persons is $70 billion and growing for the many people that we have across local, state, and federal, and the number of incarcerated is 2 million plus, which adds to the percentage of having the largest number of individuals incarcerated. Again, I think that we are now opening the door for creating a whole agenda and pathway and legislative pathway for criminal justice reform.
Let me just add to what Ms. Jackson Lee said, because she makes a very good point. But of the 2 million, about 10% of those are federal prisoners, and that's what this legislation holds. But some states have made very good reforms.
Do you have an idea of how many people this would affect in the system? How much would decrease incarceration potentially?
We do know after the last 20 years of the surge of incarcerated persons for drug offenses, that is a larger percentage of the federal system because of those drug offenses coming under the federal system. And I would imagine that, I won't give numbers, but I would imagine it would be a very sizable percentage throughout the nation.
Thank you all very much.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.